Hello again, folks, and today I want to shed a little light on some of my thoughts about the keto diet. Now, some of you by now know that I'm doing this thing, have for the last couple of years, more as a sort of a beta test, but now bringing it more mainstream. The Inner Genie Project, which is to work with people and to work with myself, of course, to become a more effective man and a more effective human being, right? So there's aspects of ourselves. There's our physiology, there's our mentality, there's our emotionality, there's other aspects of ourselves perhaps, which from a holistic health standpoint, if we work on improving ourselves in all of those aspects, we become more empowered. And as you know, as you probably agree, there's lots of challenges in the world. There's lots of craziness going on in the world and so on. And one of the perhaps most effective ways to work with that is to work on ourselves to become more healthy physically, to become more mentally astute, to become more emotionally stable, to become more confident, to improve our relationships and whatnot, right? So when people embark on diets and so on, if they're endeavoring to improve their physical health, mental health, and so on, then that's great. The question is, what's more effective? So I wanted to talk about this keto diet because this is a lot of what people are talking about these days to do with physical health. In fact, what instigated this idea to talk about this is number one, I've been very much curious about physical health for many, many years. In fact, wrote a book about health a number of years ago. And a family member of mine I recently hadn't seen for quite a number of years has gone on to this keto diet, and I was asking her about some questions about what she thought about in terms of the long term sustainability of such a diet, and I didn't get much of an answer out of her, which wasn't surprising because a lot of people who embark on these things don't know much about health. They haven't done much of their research, and I'm not claiming that I have either, but I just wanted to go down a little bit of my thought process on what I think about this sort of thing. Well, the keto diet is a reemergence, from what I can see, of what is an age old weight loss program. Weight loss, yes, not necessarily health. So if your goal is weight loss, that's one thing. If your goal is health, that's another thing. So it is possible to lose weight in a very unhealthy way, is what I'm alluding to here. And the keto diet, as many people go on it, is basically a rehashing of many, many old, tried, and failed low carb diets, basically. I Back in the day when I wrote my book on health, I was actually a fitness instructor, and I had this somebody who taught this personal training course. Grit Olston was her name, I believe, if I can remember her name correctly, and she was adamant about how you know sort of terrible these diets were in terms of the disingenuousness of those who are preaching them. And there's lots of them that have come and gone over the years. Maybe some of them still exist, but I'll just read off a few that I looked on a quick search. Right, South Beach Diet, Zone Diet, Atkins, Paleo, Volumetrics, Macrobiotic, Keto, Carb Cutting, Raw Diet, Cabbage Soup Diet. Tea diets. All of these diets, or most of them anyways, or versions of them, are basically low carb diets, and they result in, if kept on a very strict level, can result in a ketosis, which is where ketosis is a condition in the body where we get the word keto from, right? And so these are starvation diets. And Dr. Greger, who's probably one of you can look up his work at nutritionfacts.org. He is a fact-based researcher essentially, and he stated this in a video that I might put a link down below. And I don't know whose video channel this was. It was an interview, so I don't stand by anything else that's said there. I just thought it was interesting at minute 145. Anyways, he mentions ketosis is a condition where people are so carb depleted they get into states of ketosis, which is a state of sickness. That's what he's saying, right? And as we all imagine, we've all been sick before, and we can lose our appetite when we're sick. So any way that we can cause ourselves to lose our appetite, we're going to lose weight. I mean, this is starving basically, right? And so he makes the case that any sort of diet which can cause you to, even if it's eating donuts, if it can cause you to become sick and lose your appetite, then you're going to lose weight. But that's not a wholesome way, a long-term way, because in a state of ketosis, we're running a very, very low carbohydrate or next to no carbohydrate. And what happens is we begin to burn ourselves. But a wholesome way to burn extra fat is to burn it with the fire of metabolizing good quality carbohydrate, which then it creates a clean burn and not so many negative effects, right? So in talking to this family member of mine, and all of this that I'm saying, I'm not saying it as some sort of somebody who's got I'm not as researched as a guy like obviously as a guy like Dr. Greger, who spends his whole life on this and has studied it every way from Sunday, and or somebody like those like T. Colin Campbell, who did the China study, which to me is, I recommend anybody who's interested in health, please read this book. It is probably the largest human study on nutrition ever done, and very, very fact-based. And no surprise, the fake news media went after this guy and stood up for the shakedown artists in Congress and what have you to make sure that this information didn't make it to the forefront, right? Because the big lobby groups, the eggs, dairy, and meat lobbies and so on, they don't want this information out there. So, have a look at the China study, have a look at Dr. Greger's stuff, and don't listen to me necessarily. Although I did write a book, and I think it's quite a good piece of work. I wrote it quite a number of years ago. It's Optimum Health, and I did touch on ketosis at the time. In there, I talked about how in a starvation situation, okay, the metabolism is for survival only, and is a very unhealthy way to lose fat, because when fat is used as energy in the absence of sufficient blood sugar, it is metabolized ineffectively, and a byproduct called ketone bodies is produced. The accumulation of these ketone bodies in the body can lead to a condition called ketosis, which is dangerous. And I quote a reference that I'm talking about here. The reference I used was Robin Landis in her book Body Fueling, which was quite a well written book way back in the 90s. A lot of that stuff was based on Dr. Pritikin, Dr. Dean Ornish, and all that sort of stuff. A lot of that stuff was rehashed. I mean, I'm not saying that Robin Landis was extremely knowledgeable either, but it was a well received book and a fairly well researched book at the time. So, and so I asked my family member at the time when we were talking there over supper, and she lost a lot of weight and so on, but I said, how long is this sustainable? Do you know anybody who's able to stay on this keto diet for a lifetime? And I think she seemed to claim that she did, but no specifics on that. I certainly don't know anybody who's been able to stay on these diets. What I have noticed is that people who go on these weight loss diets, because it's not based on health, they're wanting to get into a bikini or whatever, is they will yo-yo back and forth, and the vast majority of them kind of fail. So I would concur with what Dr. Greger says in that very video. I mean, he says something along the lines, if is it a fit for health? Is what you're eating a fit for health? If it's just about weight loss, that's one thing. But if you want health, long-term health, how about you pick a lifestyle eating, a way of living, right? Which has proven to be reliable for longevity and health benefits. That's paraphrasing what he has to say, and I would concur with that. And I, not to be sort of tooting my own horn or whatever, but I've eaten a plant-based diet for now almost 30 years, and I'm well into my 50s now, and in fine health. But I know that that's just anecdotal, but even more so, a couple of years ago in my 50s, I walked 8,000 kilometers to this day. Nobody's been able to prove that it's other than a world record for that particular walk, and 10 million steps with brilliant energy upwards of 75 kilometers a day walking, and basically doing it, high carbohydrate diet. I understand if we're going to eat a lot of carbohydrate, we better be active, right? And I'm a very active person, and I realize when I'm not as active, I have to shrink it back but at the same time, we run on sugar, right? This whole craze against carbohydrate. Sugar is carbohydrate. And we shouldn't be eating sugar as in, and I talk about this in my book, you know, simple versus complex carbohydrate. When we eat complex carbohydrate, which is carbohydrate generally in its natural state, the all of the water and the roughage and everything in there acts as a buffer for the sugars to upload into our bloodstream. Whereas if we're eating a lot of processed sugary stuff, and even processed flours and whatnot, they are a shot up into our blood sugar very quickly and can cause spikes, which are cause diabetic reactions and so on. But when we eat more of a natural carbohydrate base, but not so much. I mean, vegetables are great, but I mean, a lot of these keto diets and so on, they're eating salads and vegetables and so on, which is extremely low on carbohydrates. And when we do that, we don't get enough carbohydrate. So it's a starvation diet. We have to be eating things like legumes and whole grains and whatnot if we're going to be energetic and we're going to have long-term sustainability. Otherwise, we're going to flip-flop off of it. And if we're on these keto starvation diets and these other low-carb diets, we mess with our metabolism, right? So that when we fall off the wagon, boom, we can just balloon back up again. So the whole goal of weight loss is truncated, as in weight gain, and ballooning back into those sort of situations. And it's a real problem in the world in terms of our personal development. If we can't stay healthy and we're fat and obese, it affects our mentality, it affects our self-confidence, it affects so many other things. So I hope to make this central to the Energini project. And it was just some comments I had about, I just wanted to make some comments about the keto diet craze because I was just recently talking to a family member, and I thought maybe I'd put this out as at least a discussion starter, not to be anything completely informative, but just to get things going. Like I say, I don't want to claim to be an expert on this, but I have written about it and researched it a while back, and am a living example of somebody who's eaten a whole plant foods diet. I'm well into my 50s now, and still fairly healthy. So I guess long term it'll see what happens. But I'd encourage people to not believe me, but do your own research. Read things like the China study. Listen to some things that Dr. Greger says, and listen to the other side as well. Make your own decision based on who's getting the best results long term. Steve here, great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share. And I hope to bring more Energini topics soon. Talk again later. Bye now.